Welcome, everybody, to the Building Code. I can't believe they brought us back. I'm Zach Ratovich.
And I'm Charlie Burtwhistle. We're here again somehow, episode number 2 for us, episode 119 for the Building Code.
We've got Bob Deeks, owner and president of RDC Fine Homes. We are covering net zero homes along some other topics, how to grow a business, how to get your customers engaged in Buildertrend, how to meet the environmental standards that are coming your way. Do you know anything about net zero homes?
I know little to nothing about net zero, so very excited to talk to Bob.
Hopefully Bob can fill us in a little bit. Let's get it.
Let's get it.
Bob, let's just start with RDC Fine Homes. Charlie and I were looking at your website. You build some beautiful homes out in British Columbia. And we want to know, just before we get into the details of kind of how you led into net zero homes, tell us about yourself. How'd you get started? I saw your company started in 1993. You've been around for a long time.
Yep.
How did that happen?
How did that happen?
The story of
so
Bob.
I never intended to go into construction.
I hear that a lot.
I followed a pretty traditional education path. Graduated from high school, went to university, got a commerce degree. Thought I would end up in the business world. I grew up in Toronto, so started my post-university career working in advertising, actually, and I had reconnected with a colleague out here in the ski school, and being between jobs and really being sick, I think, of sitting at a desk staring at four walls.
Right.
Feeling trapped, just looking for more.
Feeling trapped, yeah. So I jumped on a plane, came to Whistler, and I had just sold a house in Toronto, which I had renovated with a good friend from high school, from university. So I was sitting on a pile of money. And the market here seemed to be hugely depressed, and land values were super low, and bought 2 vacant lots on the lake.
Wow.
And all of a sudden was a landowner in Whistler, 4,500 kilometers away from where I really lived, and really knew absolutely nothing about building houses. I designed a house, literally contracted with a guy out of Ontario to do a traditional timber frame design. Thought this would be fantastic. Never really considered that financing might be a challenge. Of course, this is the late 80s when the economy is not doing great. Interest rates were fairly high. Went to get financing, got turned down at the last minute. Like, we were clearing the lot, the timber frame guys scheduled for delivery, and we had no financing. So I had to cancel everything.
Wow.
And then my partner and I really looked at the situation we were in, because we'd put all our money into the lot, and the taxes came due. And it was, even in those days, the taxes were thousands of dollars.
Right.
And we were like, holy fuck, we can't afford this. So we put the lots up for sale, sold them both within a month, and we doubled our money.
Oh wow.
Because the economy was doing better.
And you had owned those lots for how long?
12 months.
Wow.
Kind of worked out for you then.
I think we bought the 2 lots for about $120,000 and sold the 2 of them for $250,000.
Wow.
And then I looked around and bought a house in Whistler. So, all of a sudden, I was now a homeowner in Whistler, and I did not have a job. And so the 3 jobs that were available in Whistler in the late 80s were either restaurants or bars or construction. So I sold myself as a carpenter and bought some hand tools. I bought myself a hammer and a level and a saw and a bunch of other things.
So other than the renovation you did in Toronto, did you have any experience, or was this just a fake it till you make it type scenario?
This was entirely fake it till you make it. So I got a job forming concrete. And I had literally never formed concrete in my entire life. I showed up on this job site with my brand new tools. I had gone and bought, any builders listening to this will laugh, I had bought a 16-ounce finishing hammer because I literally did not know any better. So I showed up on a job site.
I have my hammer.
Form concrete, and I have my little 16-ounce with the curved claw homeowner hammer. I almost got laughed off the site the first morning.
I'm here to construct things.
Yeah, I think within a week I'd gone and bought myself a 28-ounce East Wing hammer that gave me tendonitis for the next 5 years.
Overcorrected, maybe?
Overcorrected, yeah. Got the biggest hammer I could find. And so that was my start. So I got that sort of got my feet underneath me. I was a fairly quick study, figured out concrete forming and basic carpentry skills that summer. Did that for a few years, and then in the early 90s, when we had a fairly significant recession here, there was just nobody hiring, and so I had a contact in the hotel industry who needed some maintenance work done, and started working for them, and spent the next 2 years renovating hotels. And by that point, had no interest whatsoever in going back to work for anybody else, and started RDC Fine Homes, and here we are today.
So did it primarily start as a renovation company then, or did you move almost immediately into new home structures?
Primarily just started, renovating hotels. I grabbed a couple of friends who were also unemployed and had no construction experience.
Man, the sales pitch must have been amazing. Yeah. Hey, we're just trying to make ends meet here.
No,
give us a shot.
Required, yeah.
Yeah, give us
just bring a normal sized hammer.
Take it till you make it. My core values today are positive, reliable performance. That's the core values for RDC. And I think,
love that.
Going back to those early days, while we never articulated core values, that's what I really believed in. And so we really worked hard to make sure we understood our customers' expectations. And we always doubled down on making sure that we did it right. And so, as we went out into the marketplace later in the 90s and into the 2000s, that has served us extremely well.
For sure. So kind of shifting away from you and more into RDC, obviously humble beginnings, but since then you guys have become pretty prominent home builders up in British Columbia, multiple Georgie awards I saw. I'd love to talk about just kind of the transition that RDC has made. Specifically, you guys are in the news a lot now for the net zero transmission housing and all the work you're doing from a sustainability side of things. Can you kind of walk us through that transition from the humble beginnings to the kind of enterprise you guys are now?
We, in the late 90s, I had an opportunity to build a new luxury home on a site that had an older home on it, and that older home had fairly recently been renovated. It hadn't been renovated very well, but it was a fairly significant addition. And when I went in and looked at it, the primary way that you would have developed that lot in those days is you brought a machine in and you just crunched the whole thing up and threw it all into the landfill. And as I walked around this house, all the framing lumber was less than 10 years old. The windows were less than 10 years old. There was flooring. There was, all kinds of good materials there. And right. I really looked at this and thought, we should not be landfilling this. This is perfectly good material. And then the sort of financial side of my brain also recognized that there was a fairly significant cost to tear it down and throw it into landfill, but that there might be value in the materials that were on site. So I was actually able to connect with a guy who agreed to come in and dismantle the house at no cost in return for all the materials. And so we essentially repurposed the vast majority of that building. And I think it opened my eyes in the late 90s to, there's a better way to do construction. And it started with, just a more sustainable way of demolition. And it really then turned my attention to, is there a better way to build? I was always looking for, what is the latest technology? What is a better way to do this? So we were doing heat recovery ventilators a long time before they became commonplace up here. We became knowledgeable about building science and air tightness in the early 2000s. Initially starting to use spray foam, which was a very, very new strategy for insulation in those days, specifically because we were looking for better moisture control, particularly in some of the roof assemblies we were building with a lot of valleys, and recognizing that there were some problems in venting those types of roofs. And so spray foam became a great strategy for non-vented roof applications. Of course, the heat recovery ventilators, HRVs, we became very aware of the consequences of indoor air quality and moisture control, and just, how to build a healthier, better house.
And you were doing this in the early 2000s and late 90s.
Yeah.
How common was it back then for builders to be doing that? I can't imagine that this is something that a lot of contractors were really considering?
Oh, I'd say, far less than 1% of the industry was involved in this. And then as we headed into the early 2000s, and I really started to understand that there was a huge education gap in the industry around what we did. It's one thing to frame a wall and stand them up and throw a roof on. It was an entirely different animal to really understand the building science and how moisture moved through wall assemblies, how you managed indoor air humidity, indoor air quality. And so we made a huge commitment to our, just not only to myself, but to the entire team, to make sure that we spent a lot of time and effort on educating our team around building science. And as everybody became more knowledgeable about it, we became more and more interested in the performance of houses. How can we make our houses more energy efficient? How can we make them more comfortable? As the dawning realization that energy efficiency and thermal comfort and indoor air quality all went hand in hand, and the strategies that you used for each one of them were complementary to the other. And also that if you screwed it up, there were serious consequences to that indoor environment, both from a health and safety standpoint, but also from a durability of the buildings. And so around 2005, I started looking around to see what sort of certifications were available to bring some extra accountability and due diligence to the process. And we discovered the Built Green standard. And so in 2006, we built our first Built Green certified project. And that's where air tightness testing started to become a factor in what we built, and really started understanding that if we didn't test, we really had no idea of how we were doing. And what's really commonplace here, because air tightness has now become mandatory within the BC Building Code in certain regions, as it has in other places in the United States, we all think we're building airtight houses until we test them.
Right.
And so, for us, we really started to understand if we don't test it, then we actually don't know. And while, I had a team that really understood the detailing for airtightness, there were times where we would bring the blower test in mid-construction and the guys would hit it right on. They'd hit the mark. And then there were other times where, something would come out of left field and we would fail miserably. And we would discover as a result of that mid-construction blower test that, some fairly significant things that weren't obvious had been missed. And so, that really reinforced how important certification was for us, and how important testing was to make sure that we were consistent in the delivery of that better built high performance house. And so as an extension of that, as net zero, as I started to become more knowledgeable about what net zero was and what was required, I thought that was just the logical extension of where we had started our journey. And so we had the first labeled net zero house in BC in 2010, and we used it as a demonstration project during the Olympics that were here. So we toured a couple thousand people through it. And as a result of the construction of that and the promotion that we got, we actually started to get some clients, some of whom were interested in net zero, but it really put us on the map in terms of being an expert for high performance, sustainable, energy efficient construction. And so
there's your advertising background. You're showing off your houses in the Olympics. I mean, talk about advertising gold right there.
That's right. And so, we've really been building on that and becoming, better and better at the strategies around how you build high performance houses. And today, I think every new house that we're building meets the labeling standard for either net zero or net zero ready.
Wow.
We completed the first net zero renovation in British Columbia last year. We're partway through construction of our second net zero reno, and this one will have solar panels on the roof. The first one was a net zero ready, which means that the house was modeled to be able to produce as much energy as it used. The one we're doing right now, the owner is committed to doing the solar panels. So we've got a 16 kilowatt photovoltaic array that's designed into the structure. And next summer, that'll go into place. And so that'll be our third project over the last 10 years that not only is net zero modeled, but we'll have the solar panels on the roof.
So as you guys are kind of like trailblazing the path here, the first in British Columbia, you're building all these things. Even back in the early 2000s, you said you were educating your team on building science. What sort of like tools and what were you doing to find that education and educate yourself and your team and kind of break through this barrier of, the traditional way of doing things? Because I'm sure a lot of builders listening to this right now, would love to get into that space, but maybe don't know where to start. So do you have any kind of like advice or resources that you used early on to, educate yourself on building science and set yourself down this path?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the early 2000s, I got invited to join the Canadian Home Builders Association. Wasn't really too sure where that was going to go, but I was smart enough to understand that there was going to be value. Particularly, we live in a very small community that is somewhat isolated from the mainstream construction, and becoming part of the home builders would connect me to a broader group of my peers that I could learn from. And one of the first things that I discovered was they had a really good suite of education opportunities, one of which was building science. And so I went and took the building science course.
That's something that I'm really curious about. You're taking an initiative to educate your team, and that's something I know working with builders is hard to do. And you went and took the building science course. How did you bring it back to your team and your field crew and your engineers, and what was that reception like?
Well, I think we were collecting a staff that were also interested and passionate about building better. Mm-hmm. And so I had an engaged team, and we just, I don't think we told people your job depends on you taking continuing education. But we certainly set a standard that we expect that you take the education that we're offering you, and RDC paid for it. So in the early days, we paid out of pocket for education. We gave people essentially an education budget. Although we don't do it today, there was a time where we tracked everybody's education and we awarded people for the most points.
Incentivize them a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, so
I love
incentive. And we really made it a standard that if you were going to be a senior leader on an RDC construction site, whether you were a project manager, a site superintendent, or a lead hand carpenter, we expected you to, at a minimum, take the building science course. Right. And really understand, simple things like what's the difference between an air barrier and a vapor barrier. What is the importance of a blower tower test? How do you do it? What does an HRV do for a house? And so we've continued that journey. Of course, in British Columbia, we're really lucky that the government is supporting education for skilled trades. And so we can get about 60% recovery on any approved education. And we spend, we spend upwards of about $20,000 a year on education. Of course, that's only 40% of the cost. So we're leveraging, close to $50,000 of education opportunities for our teams. Yeah, it is. And, my risk is not managed if my team doesn't know what they're doing. Right.
That makes a lot of sense. What do you say to the builder who's skeptical about net zero homes and I can't do that, or it's not realistic, or it's too expensive, or all the things we're going to get into as far as the characteristics of the home?
Or even just like you said, the class is too confusing, like the education is too hard.
The only thing that's consistent, I think, in society today is change. Like there's nothing stays the same, and the industry is changing around us incredibly quickly. When I started this journey, nobody told me I had to do this, so we were a little bit proactive. But today, the building codes are going to mandate net zero housing, and so if you want to stay in business, you have no choice as a starting point. It's intimidating. It's absolutely learning something new and learning something technical is intimidating. But it's not as difficult as you think. The old sort of somewhat worn out adage is, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time.
Right.
And so you got to start dipping your toe in the water and get some education because there's an enormous amount of education opportunities out there, whether it's in COVID land, it's online. And sometimes you need to revisit things a few times so it really sinks in. And building net zero in a large number of the climate zones in North America is not that hard. And we can talk a little bit about, what are RDC strategies to cost effectively achieve a net zero standard. Of course, we're building in a relatively cold climate in Whistler. And as we move north in Canada, and if you look at the northwest of the United States, you get some very, very cold climate. And it absolutely gets more expensive and gets more complicated the colder the climate. In a climate like Southern California, building to net zero is really quite simple.
Yeah, and I love the kind of what you were hinting at there, like strategies they can use to be cost effective. What would you say are some of like the biggest lessons you've learned? Obviously, someone like you has been doing this for a long time versus someone that's just kind of like starting out. What were some of the realizations you had to kind of get to where you are now, and probably still continuing to learn lessons, to this day?
So the two first strategies that we use when we start modeling are windows and air tightness. So we go out to the marketplace and buy the very best windows we can. And what I explain to clients is the first place we're going to make an investment is windows, because it is your lowest cost opportunity for improving not only the energy efficiency of your house, but the thermal performance in terms of, is it warm enough in winter, or is it evenly warm in every room? Is it easy to keep it cool in the summertime? It's also, interestingly, the easiest way for soundproofing a house, particularly in a busy urban environment. So, look for, we don't necessarily promote passive house, but we use passive house windows because passive house took it to the window industry and created a standard. And so passive house rated windows are going to be the highest performing windows that you can buy. And you don't have to go to Europe to buy passive house windows. Certainly in the lower mainland of British Columbia, I think we have 4 manufacturers that all have passive house rated windows, and we do try to buy local. So triple paned, high performance windows, that's our first box that we check. And then the second one is air tightness. And so I would encourage anybody who's looking to get into this space, whether it's improving the overall thermal comfort, durability, and energy efficiency of your house, is really look at a good air tightness strategy. And there's all kinds of different ways to achieve air tightness. We typically are now modeling our projects down below 150 pascals. And that, if you can find a good strategy for cost-effective air tightness sealing, that is your lowest cost pathway to high-performance buildings. We use aero barrier as our strategy. We've tried just about every other option. So we do have a wall and roof assembly strategy that we generally follow for all our projects. And then we use aero barrier to get our air tightness numbers as per our model. And we like that strategy because it brings it's a risk-free, relatively low cost way to drive certainty to the number that we need to meet the target in our model.
Well, let's take this down to your customers a little bit. Are you seeing an increase in people looking for net zero homes in your area or in the industry, or is this still a relatively niche market?
We're starting to see both. There's increasing interest, but the building code, like our building code, both nationally and provincially, has a target for net zero ready homes by 2032. Where we're consistently building here, in some cases, the local municipalities are requiring construction to meet an energy level that's just one step below net zero ready. And as I think that was introduced in some places in the United States and California, we have a step code here, which is a pathway to net zero. It's a voluntary building code pathway to energy efficiency that was made available to municipalities in British Columbia to allow municipalities to start educating and building capacity in the industry for better built houses. In January of 2022, the provincial building code will move to what is referred to as Step 3 of the BC Energy Step Code. And so that's 2 steps away from net zero ready. In 2027, they'll move the provincial code to step 4. And then in 2032, it'll move to step 5, which is that net zero ready standard. And the national code is essentially following along in a similar pathway. So by the mid 2030s, the building code for both big buildings and small buildings, houses and commercial buildings, will be net zero ready. And I think there's lots of places in the United States that are following a similar pathway. And so, it's twofold. One, we have consumers who are much more interested in this as an incentive, an initiative to reach our climate goals, but also governments are mandating this.
I love that. Yeah, the pathway and, stepping people one step at a time to get to that eventually net zero ready endpoint where you guys are. That seems like a really, really smart play there. As people are kind of transitioning towards that, what kind of insights or benefits do you normally use if you're trying to convince someone to go down this pathway of promoting net zero homes, other than it's going to be mandated?
You have to do this.
Yeah. What are the benefits?
People love to be told that.
Yeah.
This is being forced upon you.
So that's one of the things I've certainly learned in my spiel is there's no value in telling my customers what they have to do. Although I have been known to do that.
Bob, I can tell you're very passionate about it, though. I think they should know it's from a good place. You care about them, so it's important for them to know this is the expectation that I'm being held to. Therefore, I'm doing what's best for the customer.
Right.
Yeah, we're trying to do the best for you as the customer. But I figured out a long time ago that it was really hard to sell energy efficiency, to say you should spend all this extra money on energy efficiency because you're going to actually get it back in some short period of time. But as I talked about earlier on, the energy efficiency strategies are directly tied to that better built home that has better indoor air quality. It's thermally more comfortable. You go from room to room, it's the same temperature throughout the house. The house is more durable because we're managing moisture in a more effective way. We're building better building envelopes, one, because we need to manage the durability of the envelope, but we also need to manage the air tightness. And so we've always sold energy efficiency on the basis of this is just a better built house. My analogy sometimes is towards cars, because in various parts of North America, you can have a builder build you a house that really would be built to a similar standard as a 1980s car. And do you really want to go and drive a brand new car off a dealer lot that is reflective of technology from 1980?
Right.
Or do you want to go to that dealer lot and drive a car off that is reflective of the 21st century?
It's got Bluetooth.
Technology
And
Got to have the
heated seats.
And when you look at in real dollar terms, there are cars that you can buy today that probably are cheaper in real dollar terms to what was being produced in 1980. It's interesting when you look at the car analogy, because everybody wants to know what's my payback.
Yeah.
But people will drive, whether you drive a car off a lot that's $35,000 or $150,000, most of those cars, the moment you drive them off the lot, the value has been cut in half.
Yep.
Right? So you need to learn how to sell your houses like they sell cars, because that energy efficient house brings across all kinds of additional benefits to the family. Particularly when you talk about indoor air quality as a result of having a heat recovery ventilator. And particularly in today's world, when we're really worried about virus transmission and all those other things, good filtration, properly right-sized mechanical systems, which will evenly heat and cool your house, reduce your energy use, be more durable, and just be that much more thermally comfortable day in, day out. So those are the tools that you can use to sell that. And interestingly, today, the one thing we haven't talked about is carbon.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the end goal of energy efficiency is to reduce carbon emissions. But what we're now really understanding is what really impacts carbon is the embodied carbon in construction. And so that's my new conversation, and will become sort of our new niche as we move forward. With energy efficiency becoming mandated by building code, we're sort of losing our brand identity there, because everybody, whether they want to or not, is going to catch
You're going
up.
to match the rest of the market. You've just been ahead of it. You got to find the next thing.
And so embodied carbon, whether there's a lot of discussions around carbon emissions, but what we're learning now is that the embodied carbon in construction far, far outstrips the emissions from operation. And then, of course, your fuel choice has an enormous impact on emissions too. So that's our new conversation with our clients. And you'll start to see on our social media channels, I'm going to start to talk a lot more about the impacts of carbon. We have a new tool that we're using to measure embodied carbon. So we're just in the process of going back through some of our previous projects to understand, how much embodied carbon was in there. We're going to look to change some of the materials that we're using in construction next year. I think, while I haven't put it in paper, our goal, maybe not for 2022, but for 2023, will certainly be a net zero carbon building, because there are lots of materials that are available today that if you put enough of them in the house, the carbon capture of those types of materials one is the most obvious, will exceed the embodied carbon in things like concrete. And so, get your building down to a place where you've actually stored more carbon than you've emitted in construction. And I think that's going to be the end goal. While the industry doesn't know it, and we haven't got our head wrapped around it, the first step is going to be net zero construction, but the next is going to be net zero carbon.
You heard it here first, folks.
Love that.
I'm glad you brought up tools and things that have helped improve your business. And that kind of brings us to Buildertrend and how you came to us. When you were growing your company and looking to set yourself apart in the market, what role did technology on that side play?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, in early days, I was super frustrated with things like timesheets and the mistakes that were getting made. And so one of the first things I really started looking for was a better way to track and manage time. And we've always been very transparent with our clients. We want to show them, where they're spending their money. And part of what was important to me, because so much of the cost of construction is the wages that are paid to the carpenters. And it's expensive. And so being able to provide clients with a detailed explanation of, where did the guys spend their time? What did they do? How much time did they spend on those individual tasks was important. And I'm actually shocked today to find, particularly subtrades who are still doing, and small contractors who are still doing all their payroll manually.
I've seen it dozens of times in my own experience traveling and working with businesses. A lot of things are written on paper that they hand in, and then they're manually entering it. And I mean, even their invoicing systems are that rudimentary when it comes down to it.
And business owners that are staying up to midnight.
Yeah.
5 days a week to try and keep up with this.
That's
something we just taken it for granted.
Yeah.
So
this is how I should be doing it. It's like, no, there's something else you could be doing.
There's a better way.
And they're thinking it.
We were looking for a better platform that had a more friendly interface, both for staff, but we were also really looking for something that we could engage our clients with.
Right.
We deal with a lot of clients who don't live here, and construction is expensive. It creates an enormous amount of anxiety, and if we can connect our clients meaningfully day to day on what's going on their job site, it manages their anxiety. And if it manages their anxiety, they are happier, and they're much easier to deal with. A happy client is an easy client to deal with. One of the huge selling features was the support that was there. Somebody that you could pick up the phone and ask a question. There was no charge for it. So, the guys, are encouraged to use that whenever they do. And very supportive help. There's no stupid questions. And I think the scheduling tool and the daily log for our clients have proven to be enormously valuable tools. I have a client right now in Hong Kong. We're doing a very large, complex project for him under a very, very short timeline. We started in January. They've been stuck in Hong Kong and haven't been able to travel now for over 12 months. And he shared with me a week ago, he said, when I did my house in Dublin, I had to make 6 trips from Hong Kong to Dublin.
Quick flight.
to make sure that my project was progressing. And neighbors would call me and tell me there was nobody on site, or the builder wasn't communicating very well. And he said there was you can't imagine how much anxiety it created from my wife and I through that process. He said, the ability to log in every morning, read the daily log update to see what the guys did, to look at the photographs and see the progression of the photographs, go onto the scheduling tool and double check that, what they say is going on site is matched on the schedule that they're showing me. He said, we have no anxiety. He said, while I can't travel today because of the travel restrictions, he said, I feel no need to make a trip to come out and make sure that you guys are doing what you said you were going to do. We feel so secure and there's so much trust. And I'd say that, the team is doing a good job, but sometimes it's hard to demonstrate, what you're doing. And Buildertrend helps us enormously in making sure the client understands that we're doing what we said we were going to do.
I think that's huge. And I hear that all the time talking to our customers as far as with getting their homeowners involved. They're hesitant. They're a little nervous. They're afraid they might show something that they shouldn't in the program or do something they shouldn't be doing. And my message to them, and Bob, I would invite you to speak on this, is the benefits that you gain far outweigh the potential of any sort of mistake you might make initially while you're learning the program or getting involved with it.
The worst thing you can ever do is assume that you can hide your mistakes from your clients, because you can hide some things, but if you continue to hide stuff, eventually it's going to trip you up, and that'll undermine the trust you have with your client in a heartbeat, right? So if you own up to small mistakes and you're transparent about small mistakes, and you're like, yeah, the boys made a mistake, they had to redo that, I'm not going to charge you for it. You can see the mistake was made. I'm going to show you the credit on your invoice. You can turn a negative into a positive very, very quickly. And those mistakes are very, very strong learning moments for your team. Like they won't make that mistake again. But if you bury those mistakes, then essentially you're teaching your team that it's okay to make mistakes because there's no consequences.
Right.
So,
well, Bob, I think we could talk all day, and we've put you through the ringer here. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. We've covered
anytime.
We've covered all types of things, going from advertising to building net zero homes and how to get your team to buy in.
Yeah, incredibly valuable stuff, Bob. Really, really appreciate your time. And I was going to say, we can link all your socials in the show notes as well, too, so anybody listening out there can follow along. And as you begin to, present on some of these things that RDC is doing, it seems like a great educational resources for anybody listening.
Yeah, and so, we've got, our YouTube channel. We do regular posts on our projects there, and then, our Facebook and Instagram has all those videos that we really use as an education tool, just to demonstrate what we're doing and help the industry understand what some of those simple strategies are. And then, of course, it's a great promotional tool for us for well-aligned clients who are thinking about the same things.
All right, signing out. This is Zach Charley
Burtwhistle. Appreciate it. This is the Building Code.
Cheers, guys.